Being a member of the Lobo Gang.
What's going on? You fools are ruining a good building.
Put your guns away. Okay?
Let's say somehow you end up joining the Lobo Gang in Red Dead Redemption 2. First thing you're going to notice, this is not a chill gang. These guys live out in New Austin, which basically means heat, dust, and trouble everywhere you go. Their main base is Thieves Landing, and the name alone should tell you the vibe of the place. It's less of a town and more like a permanent outlaw hangout where everyone is either drunk, armed, or planning a robbery. If you're part of this gang, your daily life is pretty simple. Wake up, grab your gun, ride out with a few other members, and then look for someone to rob. Could be a traveler, a trader, or maybe a wagon passing through the desert. Either way, the plan is usually the same. Stop them, threaten them, and take whatever they have. And the Del Lobos are not exactly subtle about it. A lot of the time, you're not even robbing people quietly. You're straight up ambushing them. Hide behind rocks, wait for someone to pass by, then suddenly 5 guys with rifles jump out of the desert. And fights? Oh yeah, you're going to see a lot of those. These guys are known for going all out in gunfights. They'll throw dynamite, fire bottles, anything that makes the fight bigger and louder. So if you join this gang, expect things to escalate very quickly. What starts as a small robbery can easily turn into a full shootout. Another thing you'll notice is how territorial the Del Lobos are. Places like Fort Mercer, Gaptooth Breach, and Thieves Landing basically belong to them. If strangers wander in, the gang doesn't ask questions. Most of the time, they just assume you're trouble and start shooting. So, if you're part of the gang, a lot of your job is just guarding these hideouts and making sure no one takes them. And every now and then, things get even crazier. The gang doesn't just rob travelers, they sometimes go after entire towns. There's even a moment where they attack Valentine trying to break their leader out of jail. Imagine riding into a town with your gang thinking it's a rescue mission, and suddenly the whole place turns into a massive gunfight. So yeah, being in the Del Lobo gang means one thing: constant chaos. You're always riding somewhere, robbing someone, or fighting somebody. And the worst part? There's always some legendary gunslinger or bounty hunter around the corner. So if you join the Del Lobos, life might be exciting for a while. But there's a pretty good chance your story ends the same way most Del Lobo members do. Face down in the desert, while some cowboy rides away with your loot. In Laramie Gang,
What's going on? You fools are ruining a good building.
Put your guns away. Okay?
this gang has one thing that make it distinguished from the others. For instance, you're riding through Big Valley, nice weather, mountains in the distance, peaceful ranches everywhere, and then someone in your gang says something like, "All right, boys, time to convince this rancher to sell." That's when it hits you. You're basically working for the Laramie Gang, which means you're the Wild West version of a very aggressive property negotiation team. See, these guys don't usually rob random travelers or trains. Their whole job is much simpler: make people give up their land. Some rich rancher wants a property, the owner refuses to sell, and suddenly you and a bunch of armed men show up at their ranch like extremely unfriendly real estate agents. The first visit usually isn't full chaos. It's more like intimidation. You ride in, act tough, maybe push a ranch hand around a bit, remind everyone that accidents can happen out here. The idea is simple: scare them enough that selling the land suddenly sounds like a great idea. But if the ranch owner still says no, yeah, that's when the Laramie Gang stops pretending to be polite. Buildings get burned, cattle get stolen, and sometimes people just disappear. And the worst part is, some of the gang members clearly enjoy the job a little too much. Your main hangout spot is Hanging Dog Ranch, which basically serves as the gang's headquarters. It's where everyone rides back after a job, counts whatever they took, and waits for the next contract. Because that's the thing about the Laramies, they don't really operate like a loose outlaw gang. They work more like hired muscle. Someone wealthy pays them. They cause problems until the land changes hands. Job done. And believe it or not, Rockstar actually pulled this idea from real history. Back in the 1890s, during the Johnson County War in Wyoming, powerful cattle barons hired gunmen to scare smaller ranchers off their land. The Laramie Gang is basically that situation, just with more shootouts. Now, from your perspective as a gang member, most days would feel pretty routine. Ride out with the boys, scare a rancher, maybe steal some cattle on the way back. But every once in a while, the plan goes sideways. Like when the gang tries to push around Pronghorn Ranch and suddenly runs into a guy named John Marston, which is pretty much the worst possible person you could annoy. Next thing you know, wagons are being chased, fists are flying, and eventually the whole gang ends up defending Hanging Dog Ranch in a massive gunfight. So yeah, being in the Laramie Gang probably feels less like the romantic outlaw life, and more like working a very dangerous job where the boss tells you, "All right, boys, today we're collecting unpaid land." And sometimes that collection job ends with half the gang getting shot. The Lemoyne Raiders.
Legal matter, not your concern.
And if you end up in the Lemoyne Raiders, everyone around you would dress like the Civil War ended about 5 minutes ago. Gray uniforms, yellow neckerchiefs, old military gear. The whole group looks less like a gang and more like a very angry history reenactment club that forgot the war actually ended decades ago. The strange part is that life in this gang doesn't feel like the chaotic, outlaw lifestyle most gangs have. These guys operate more like a militia, which means if you're a member, things are surprisingly organized. You're not just randomly riding around robbing travelers. Most of the time you're setting up ambushes, guarding hideouts, or planning attacks on people the gang doesn't like. And the list of people they don't like is pretty long. Northerners, government officials, city folk, lawmen, basically anyone who doesn't agree with their worldview. Your territory is mostly around roads and Scarlet Meadows, where the gang has taken over old plantations and forts. Places like Shady Bell or Fort Brennan serve as hideouts, and they feel more like military outposts than outlaw camps. And honestly, the Lemoyne Raiders fight very differently from other gangs. Most outlaws just rush into a fight and start shooting everywhere. These guys actually plan things out. They'll block roads, hide in the trees, and wait for the perfect moment to jump. Sometimes you'll even roll up with 10 other riders for a full ambush. Which means if you're riding with the gang, there's a good chance you're spending a lot of time hiding in bushes waiting for someone to ride by. Not exactly glamorous, but very effective. The gang also makes money in other ways. They work with families like the Braithwaites, helping run illegal moonshine operations and protecting shipments. So sometimes your job isn't even fighting, it's just standing around guarding barrels of alcohol in the middle of a swamp. And every once in a while, things go very wrong. Like when the Raiders try to stop a wagon on the road and realize the driver is Arthur Morgan and Sadie Adler. What was supposed to be a simple robbery quickly turns into a very bad day for the gang. Later on, their problems get even worse when their leader Lindsay Wofford ends up with a bounty on his head. And when someone puts a $100 bounty on you in 1899, that means every bounty hunter in the region suddenly becomes very interested in your location. So being part of the Lemoyne Raiders would feel a little different from most gangs. You're not just robbing people for fun. In your mind, you're still fighting for a cause, even if the rest of the world moved on a long time ago. Which means most days you're riding around Lemoyne with a bunch of former soldiers who still think they're in a war. And occasionally, some outlaw named Arthur shows up and ruins the entire operation. The Foreman brothers gang. This gang runs on grudges. Not big outlaw plans, not huge robberies, just personal revenge, and people who refuse to let things go. Your leader is Anthony Foreman. And if there's one thing everyone in the gang knows, it's that Anthony has been holding onto one particular grudge for a very long time. A former gang member named Tilly Jackson left the group after killing his cousin Malcolm and running away. And in Anthony's mind, that's not something you just move on from. So if you're riding with the Foreman boys, a lot of your gang activity would basically feel like helping your boss hunt down someone who already escaped years ago. Picture the situation. You're hanging around towns like Rhodes or Valentine, trying to keep an eye out for her. Maybe someone in the gang hears a rumor, maybe someone thinks they spotted her, and suddenly everyone's riding out again like, this is the most important mission in the world. And the weird part is, the rest of the gang probably doesn't even fully understand why the feud is still going. It's just one of those things where the boss says, we're doing this, and everyone else goes along with it. Eventually, the gang does manage to grab Tilly and drag her to Radley's house, thinking they finally settled the score. At that moment, if you're part of the gang, you probably feel pretty confident. Job's done. Revenge achieved. But here's the problem with that plan. You just kidnapped someone who happens to be part of the Linde Gang, which means before long, two very angry people, Arthur Morgan and Susan Grimshaw, come riding in to fix the situation. And when those two show up, things go downhill very fast. Suddenly, the place turns into a shootout, half the gang gets wiped out, and before you know it, the entire operation that Anthony spent years obsessing over collapses in about 10 minutes. That's kind of what life in the Foreman brothers gang would feel like. Not huge robberies, not big outlaw adventures, just a small gang stuck chasing an old revenge story until they accidentally mess with the wrong people. And once that happens, the gang basically falls apart. By the time a few years pass, the Foreman boys are gone completely. Just another gang that didn't last long in the world of Red Dead. The O'Driscoll boys. And regarding the O'Driscoll boys, if you happen to end up with them, it would not be because you carefully chose them, but because one day you needed money, someone handed you a rifle, and suddenly you're standing in a camp full of loud Irish outlaws yelling about Dutch van der Linde. That's pretty much how people end up in this gang. See, the O'Driscolls aren't picky. If you can ride a horse, pull a trigger, and don't ask too many questions, you're basically hired on the spot. Colm O'Driscoll runs the whole thing, and his strategy is simple. Don't worry about skill, just get more people. Which means if you're part of the gang, you're surrounded by a lot of members. Camps everywhere, patrols everywhere, random groups riding around causing trouble in the forests and plains. The gang spreads out across places like Cumberland Forest, Big Valley, and the Heartlands. So wherever you go, there's a good chance you'll bump into another group of O'Driscolls. Now here's the funny part about being in this gang. Half the time you're not even sure what the actual plan on is. Someone says, Dutch's gang was spotted nearby, and suddenly everyone's grabbing their guns and riding out like it's the most important mission ever. Because the one thing every O'Driscoll shares is this massive obsession with Dutch van der Linde. Apparently the two gangs used to work together a long time ago. Then someone killed someone's brother, someone else killed someone's lover, and now both gangs basically spend their time trying to ruin each other's lives. So if you're an O'Driscoll member, you're probably hearing the same speech over and over. Today we're finally going to deal with Dutch. And somehow, it never works. Most days in the gang are messy. Ambushes, robberies, random gunfights. The gang is huge, but they're not exactly known for careful planning. Sometimes the plan is literally just hide behind some rocks and jump whoever rides past. And occasionally that works. Other times the person riding past turns out to be Arthur. Morgan, which usually means the fight ends with half the gang lying on the ground. The gang also has a bit of a reputation for being brutal. Probably the darkest moment is what happens to Kieran Duffy, a former member who leaves the gang and joins Dutch's crew. The O'Driscolls eventually catch him, torture him, and send a very disturbing message back to camp. That kind of thing tells you a lot about the gang's mentality. Loyalty isn't really a big concept here. Numbers are. And the strange part is, even with all those members, the whole gang eventually falls apart the moment Colm O'Driscoll himself gets captured in St. Denis. His men try to rescue him during the hanging, but the plan fails spectacularly. So if you were part of the O'Driscoll boys, life would feel loud, chaotic, and full of constant fights with Dutch's gang. A lot of yelling, a lot of shooting, and a lot of guys who joined because someone told them it sounded like a good idea at the time. And in the Wasawababia, and by that giant gang with all those numbers still ends up losing the one thing they built everything around, their leader, the St. Denis Mob. Now imagine you somehow end up working for the St. Denis Mob. First thing you notice, this doesn't feel like a normal outlaw gang at all. There's no dusty camp in the woods, no tents, no guys sleeping next to their horses. Instead, you're standing in St. Denis, the biggest and fanciest city in the entire game, surrounded by brick buildings, street lamps, and people wearing suits. And the gang members? Same thing. Instead of bandanas and worn-out coats, everyone's dressed like they're heading to a business meeting. Nice suits, clean hats, polished boots. If someone walked past you on the street, they probably wouldn't even realize you're part of a criminal organization. That's kind of the whole trick. Because the St. Denis Mob doesn't rely on loud robberies or big gunfights, most of the time their power comes from something much simpler: money and connections. Your boss is Angelo Bronte, a very rich and very confident Italian crime boss who runs everything from a massive mansion on Flavian Street. And if you're part of his crew, your job probably isn't robbing trains. You're doing things like collecting debts, protecting smuggling operations, or reminding local businesses that paying the mob is a very good idea. And the craziest part? Half the time the police already know what's going on, i.e., they just don't do anything about it. Bronte has enough influence in the city that many officers simply look the other way. So being part of this gang would feel less like hiding from the law and more like working right under their noses. Of course, every now and then things get a little messy, like when the van der Linde Gang shows up in St. Denis looking for Jack Marston. Suddenly you've got Arthur, Dutch, and John walking into Bronte's mansion demanding answers. Bronte plays it cool at first. He even sends them to do some dirty work for him, acting like everything is just friendly business. But if you're one of Bronte's men watching all this unfold, you probably start realizing something important. Dutch van der Linde is not the type of person you want to mess with. Sure enough, not long after that, Dutch and his crew show up in the middle of the night and storm the mansion. Guards go down, bullets start flying, and suddenly the fancy house that usually hosts polite meetings turns into a full shootout. And the boss? They find him hiding in the bathtub. Not exactly the most intimidating moment for a crime lord. From there, things get very bad for the mob. Bronte gets dragged onto a boat, and Dutch decides to end his career in a way that is both brutal and very memorable. After that, the whole organization loses its main leader, and the power in St. Denis slowly shifts to Guido Martelli, Bronte's former right-hand man. So if you were part of the St. Denis mob, life would feel very different from the other gangs in Red Dead. Less riding through the wilderness, more walking through crowded streets, collecting money, and pretending everything you're doing is perfectly normal. Right up until someone like Dutch decides to kick down your front door. The Ike Skelding's boys.
Me ask twice.
Whoa! What are you trying to...
This gang operates as bounty hunters, and if you end up riding with Ike Skelding's boys, then technically, you're not even supposed to call yourselves a gang. You're bounty hunters. At least that's the official story. Instead of robbing banks or trains, your job is hunting down wanted criminals. Someone with a bounty on their head, someone the law wants captured, that's where you and the crew come in. Ride out, track them down, drag them back, collect the reward. Simple job. Except Ike's crew isn't exactly known for following rules. If someone offers a bigger payment to hand the target over somewhere else, well, suddenly the rules become a lot more flexible. Lawman, outlaw, random rich guy, whoever pays the most might end up getting the prisoner. So being part of this crew would feel less like a heroic bounty hunter and more like a professional problem solver with a gun. Most of your days would probably involve riding across open country looking for your next payday. Someone spots a wanted poster, someone hears about a fugitive hiding near the river, and the whole crew heads out to collect. And eventually, the crew lands a very big target, a member of the Linde Gang named Sean McGuire. From your perspective, that probably feels like hitting the jackpot. Sean's loud, reckless, and definitely worth a reward, so the gang manages to capture him and set up camp while deciding what to do next. At that moment, you're probably thinking things are going pretty well. You've got the prisoner tied up, the crew's guarding the camp, and soon someone's going to pay for him. The problem is, you just captured a member of Dutch Van, der Linde's gang, and those guys tend to come looking for their people. Before long, Arthur Morgan, Javier, Charles, and Josiah Trelawney show up nearby. What starts as a quiet rescue attempt quickly turns into a full shootout, and suddenly your peaceful bounty hunter camp becomes the worst place to be standing. Bullets everywhere, people dropping left and right, and Sean yelling jokes the entire time while escaping. And just like that, the entire operation falls apart. So if you were riding with Ike Skelding's boys, life would probably feel like a risky business where every job could either end with a big payday or with Arthur Morgan kicking down your camp and ruining the whole thing. Linde Gang.
What on? You fools are ruining a good building.
Put your guns away. Okay?
Alright, now imagine you're actually part of the Linde Gang. At first, it honestly feels pretty great. You're not just some random outlaw riding alone. You're living in a big camp full of people who actually know each other. Someone's cooking stew, someone's playing cards, Uncle is probably pretending to work while drinking, and Dutch is standing near the fire giving another speech about freedom. And somehow, everyone believes him. Dutch talks about a world where you live free, away from governments and rich businessmen telling you what to do. Rob from the people who deserve it, help the people who don't. It sounds less like a gang and more like a strange outlaw family. So, your days are a mix of normal camp life and absolute chaos. One morning, you're helping person hunt deer for food. That same afternoon, you're robbing a train with Arthur, John, and Bill while everyone's yelling over gunfire. Then later that night, you're back at camp again, eating stew and listening to someone argue about who forgot to donate money to the gang fund. And the gang moves a lot. First, you're freezing in the mountains at Coulter, then suddenly you're living on cliffs at Horseshoe Overlook, then hiding near roads, then stuck in a swamp mansion at Shady Belle. Every time things start to feel comfortable, the law shows up and everyone has to pack up again. But if you're paying attention, you start noticing something slowly changing. Dutch still gives speeches about having a plan, but the plans start getting worse. The robberies get messier. The gang loses people. Everyone's more tense than before, and Dutch starts listening to one particular person a little too much. Micah Bell. Now imagine being in camp watching this guy walk around like he owns the place. He's rude, loud, and somehow Dutch keeps trusting him more than the people who've been there for years. Arthur clearly doesn't trust him, neither do a lot of the others. But Dutch keeps saying the same thing. Have some faith. And that's when the cracks really start showing. The jobs go bad. People die. The gang that once felt like a big, messy family slowly turns into a group of tired outlaws who aren't even sure what they're running toward anymore. By the time you reach the final camp at Beaver Hollow, things feel completely different. Nobody's joking around the fire anymore. Everyone's suspicious. The dream Dutch kept talking about, that life of freedom, feels like it's slipping away. And at the center of it all is Arthur Morgan, trying to hold everything together while realizing the gang he spent his whole life in is falling apart. So, being part of the Linde Gang would feel like riding through the Wild West with a group of legends. Right up until the moment you realize the story isn't about winning. It's about watching the end of an era happen from the inside. Bill Williamson's gang.
Hello. What do you want?
Now imagine this for a second. The Linde Gang falls apart, everyone goes their own way, and somehow you end up joining Bill Williamson's gang. And honestly, the first thing you'd probably notice is that nobody in this group really knows what they're doing. Bill finally gets what he always wanted, his own gang. No Dutch telling him what to do, no Arthur questioning his ideas. He's the boss now, running the whole operation out of Fort Mercer in the middle of New Austin. And to be fair, the place does look pretty intimidating. Huge stone fort, thick walls, guns everywhere. From the outside, it probably feels like you're part of some powerful outlaw army guarding a fortress in the desert. But once you actually live there for a while, the illusion fades a little. Because unlike Dutch's gang, which at least had plans and structure, Bill's crew feels more like a bunch of random outlaws who happen to show up at the same place. Drifters, criminals, guys looking for easy money. anyone with a gun can basically join, which means the gang's strategy usually comes down to something like ride out, cause trouble, ride back, rob a ranch, raid a farm, pick fights with whoever crosses the road. The gang quickly earns a reputation for being violent and unpredictable, which is exactly the kind of reputation Bill likes. For a while, it actually works. People in New Austin start seeing the Williamson Gang as the most dangerous group left in the region. Fort Mercer becomes their stronghold, and most folks would rather avoid the area completely. Then one day, a familiar face rides up to the fort. John Marston. And Bill handles that situation the most Bill Williamson way possible by immediately shooting John off his horse. At that moment, if you're part of the gang, it probably feels like a victory. The problem is, John Marston doesn't give up that easily. Pretty soon the gang starts hearing rumors. John's working with marshals. Posse members are forming. People are preparing to come after Fort Mercer. And then one day, a wagon rolls up to the fort with a salesman trying to pitch some miracle tonic, which seems harmless, right up until the wagon opens and John pops out with a Gatling gun. At that point, the entire fort turns into absolute chaos. Bullets flying everywhere, gang members dropping left and right, and the big fortress that once looked unstoppable suddenly feels like the worst place to be standing. So being part of Bill Williamson's gang would probably feel exciting at first. A big fort, a loud leader, and the idea that you're running the desert. But the problem with following someone like Bill is simple. He always wanted to be the boss. He just never really knew how to be one. The Murfree Brood. All right.
What's on? You fools are ruining a good building.
Put your guns away. Okay?
Now imagine the worst possible gang you could accidentally join in Red Dead Redemption 2. You wake up one morning and realize you're living with the Murfree Brood, and immediately something feels very wrong. First off, there's no proper camp, no tents, no wagons, no stew cooking over a fire like other gangs. Instead, you're hiding out in Beaver Hollow, which is basically a creepy cave system deep in the woods of Roanoke Ridge. Dark trees everywhere, strange noises at night, and half the people around you look like they haven't seen soap since the 1800s. Because the Murfree Brood aren't really a gang in the normal sense. They're more like a feral family that's been living in the woods for generations. Most of them barely talk normally. They growl, yell, laugh at weird times, and seem way too excited about attacking random travelers. So, if you were part of this group, your daily routine wouldn't be robbing banks or planning big heists. It would be something more like this: hide in the forest. Wait for someone unlucky enough to pass through. Jump out of the trees and attack them like you're in some kind of horror movie. And the Brood are very territorial about their land. Roanoke Ridge basically belongs to them, and if anyone camps there, travels there, or even looks like they might be lost in the woods, the Murfrees take that personally. Sometimes they'll even leave creepy warnings, bodies hanging from trees, strange traps on the road, stuff that basically tells people you really shouldn't be here. And fighting alongside them is chaotic. Instead of clever ambushes or organized gunfights, half the gang just charges forward with shotguns, machetes, or whatever they grabbed first. Occasionally, someone even lights a wagon on fire and pushes it toward the enemy like that somehow counts as a strategy. And weirdly enough, it sometimes works. But the moment things get really bad for the Murfrees is when Arthur Morgan and Charles show up looking for a new hideout. They decide Beaver Hollow would be a great place for camp. The problem? You're already living there, so suddenly your cave home turns into a battlefield. Gunshots echoing through the tunnels, dynamite flying everywhere, and the gang getting pushed out of the hollow they've been living in for years. The crazy part is, even after all that, the Murfree Brood never completely disappear. They just scatter back into the woods and keep doing the same thing they've always done, lurking around Roanoke Ridge and waiting for the next unlucky traveler. So if you were part of the Murfree Brood, life wouldn't feel like being in an outlaw gang. It would feel more like being stuck in the background of a very disturbing wilderness horror story. And everyone else in the region is just hoping they never run into you in the woods at night. The Skinner brothers.
Cozy fire.
Now imagine riding through tall trees and somehow ending up with the Skinner brothers. And the moment you meet them, you'd probably start wondering how you got yourself into this situation. Because this group doesn't behave like a normal gang at all. There's no big leader giving speeches, no plans for robberies, no talk about money or gold. Instead, everyone around you looks like they just walked out of the woods after living there for 10 years straight. Long beards, messy clothes, weapons that look like they've been used a little too much. And the camps? Let's just say they're not exactly welcoming. Most gangs decorate their camps with wagons, tents, maybe a campfire. The Skinner brothers prefer bones, blood trails, and whatever unfortunate traveler wandered into the wrong forest. So if you were somehow part of this group, your daily routine wouldn't be planning heists or robbing trains. It would mostly involve wandering through tall trees, hunting animals, scavenging supplies, and occasionally ambushing people unlucky enough to ride through the forest. And when the Skinners attack, they don't exactly do it quietly. Sometimes they use bows and arrows, sometimes machetes, sometimes they just run straight at their target, yelling like they're about to burst like a suicide bomber. It's chaotic, brutal, and honestly pretty terrifying for anyone on the receiving end, which is why the whole area around tall trees slowly turns into a place travelers avoid completely. But eventually the Skinners make one very big mistake. They start causing trouble for a guy who just moved into the area, John Marston. At first it's just ambushes in the woods. A few hired guns get killed. People start realizing these forests are way more dangerous than they look. Then things escalate. The Skinners kidnap Uncle, tie him up, and start roasting his back over a fire like they're preparing dinner. And that's when John and Charles decide they've had enough. Suddenly, the Skinners' camp becomes the target instead of the hunters. Guns blazing, enemies dropping everywhere, and the group that spent years terrorizing tall trees finally gets pushed back for once. Even after that fight, though, the Skinner brothers never completely disappear. They just keep moving through the forests, setting up new camps, waiting for the next traveler to wander into the wrong patch of woods. So, if you were part of the Skinner brothers, life wouldn't feel like being in a gang chasing riches or fame. It would feel more like living in the middle of a very violent wilderness nightmare, where everyone else in the region is hoping they never cross your path in tall trees.